few days because they're one of the key partners that I work with. I'm on their board of directors, and I've been working on national occupational standards and learning recognition frameworks where we've gone and interviewed hundreds upon hundreds of people to understand what it is they do every day, which then allows us to reverse design for effective training. And another piece of my research is that I work a lot in open education resources. And the idea behind that is that if we need to see something that's necessary for a public good, that we need to democratize it and make it freely available. And so I've been working with committees like UNESCO's Technical and Vocational Education Center in Germany and helping understand the importance of the food system and the open education resources that are required for the success of the food system.
Thank you very much, Amy. And that was a discussion we were having over lunch, in fact, which maybe we'll bring up, is the importance of democratizing learning and the qualifications versus qualifications that might be necessary to get into food training. So if I forget that, please remind me, because I'd love to have that little discussion here again. Now, I also would like to thank you because we sent out some polls for this session and there's been a great response. So could we get the first two polls up? Now, the first one is very general, but what's the state of food safety training in your region? As you can see, the predominant amount of people here have said excellent or good. Now, I am wondering, if that is the case, why are we sitting here? So, what is your response, Richard, when you see that poll? Is that reflective of what you have witnessed in your career and most recently?
In this particular region, for the audience, the trainers are usually very skilled and knowledgeable. There's an awful lot of them, but they're at a very, very high level compared with other countries when, for instance, they don't need a degree to be a trainer. Most of the trainers here have to have a degree in the relevant subject and then additional qualifications. So the training is generally very good and in some cases excellent. In other countries it may be different. However, I am concerned that many really good training companies and trainers are coming to me and saying there is a major problem within the region, so we're not just talking about UAE, wider, whereby training is being carried out at ridiculous, unsustainable prices. Plus we've got major issues with fraudulent certification. Plus we've got businesses accepting attendance certificates instead of invigilated exams certificates. Now, I'm not saying you should always have to have an invigilated exam. A lot of training, especially with bespoke training, can have an attendance or a CPD. But there is a lot of things happening that are driving the good trainers away. So although overall very good and excellent, I don't have a problem with that, I do have some concerns with the things that trainers are telling me.
Interesting, because we can't get into the granularity of what regions and who voted for what, but Barbara, in your experience, and again, this is such a general question, but how would you rate the success of food safety training in what you have seen?
Well, I think it's important to realize in any kind of research assessment that the question, what is the state of food safety training in your region, this response is not actually the state of food safety training in our region. This response is what we think the state of food safety training in is our region. And I would say we are in the perfect sweet spot as good, because I would think that people here feel good about our jobs. They feel good about our training. We all think we're doing pretty well, but we are here to learn. So we all believe we can do a little better. So I think that question is the result of a good conference where we have committed people who care very much about what they're doing. That's not the question you asked. The question is, how is the training? And that's something I'm interested in, is how do we actually measure it? How do we find those gaps that was talking about, to identify what makes training successful. How do we assess that? So I am not from this region, but I've seen a lot of really interesting things about people doing some of that assessment that gives me a lot of hope.
Great, and we'll be talking about that. So then I guess, Joe, from your psychologist's perspective, maybe not like picking up on some of the things Barbara has just said, what would you think this is reflective of really the state of training, or is this in some respect a feel-good factor that Barbara was saying that we're all feeling in?
I think it's a bit of both. I think, as Barbara will both being researchers, we know the question, the context, the timing has a big impact on the response. But I would say from my experience working in the UAE, there are some really excellent initiatives that have been put in place over the years to improve training programs. We have, as Richard mentioned, we have government programs where material is approved, it is consistently implemented. We have invigilated exams as a standard across the country. That doesn't exist in other countries. We have trainers being audited by government members. We have a lot of really good practice and a lot of work that goes in this region to making training work. We even have the government sharing outbreaks directly with the trainers and saying, look, we've had an outbreak, let's all talk about it. How can we get that back into our training material? One of my hats is working in an awarding body where we liaise with the government and they say, look, we've had a problem with salmonella, what are you going to do about it? We build an activity into our training material, that goes out to the trainers. So there's a lot of really good stuff that goes on in the UAE that I don't think everybody's always aware of. Having said that, training isn't the entire solution to food safety. So yes, the training is good, in some cases excellent, there's a lot of good things, it can still be improved. But the other side of that is that food safety requires a lot more than training. So there's that broader context of when someone has been trained, what happens after that.
Absolutely, and that's what we're going to also talk about later. You guys are brilliant. Okay, Layal.
I think for a training to be really successful, it's not about having a certificate of completion of a training, not even to have an exam after the training and we have completed. It's the training is excellent and completed when we see the right behavior in the food industry, when we see the correct implementation of food safety practice. And if we don't see this, we need to go back to this training and to see how we can improve it. So a real excellent training is a training that has clear objective, clear learning outcome, interactive teaching, feedback to go back and improve it. So it's a journey of continual improvement.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's come up again and again, that it has to be a journey without kind of being corny. You don't get to that destination straight away. It's a lifelong journey. So your experience of training is from Canada, and I think it's going to be very different from what Richard and what Joe was telling us about. But you would say, and we've moved on a bit here from our poll, but I think you would probably say it was also excellent.
I see training as a continuum. Now, I am based in Canada, but I do have projects in countries around the world: Vietnam, Cambodia, Peru, Jamaica, Barbados. And so with that in mind, training is a continuum in that you are going to be in a discrete space learning something, but then there's the aspect of application within the workplace. And unless there's that understanding of the continuum, for example, we raised this question at lunchtime. I could learn how to wash my hands with a hands-free sink, but the moment I walk in and my sink is now on a foot pedal, my training needs to go through that continuum, and someone has to then do the assessment at the workplace. And that, I think, is really important, that we're following through that. Just because someone walks in with a certificate of completion or some sort of credential does not necessarily mean they have the site-specific occupational task to be able to fulfill the training that they had accomplished. So everyone has a role to play in training.
And that is a perfect segue to our next poll, which is asking the question, in your experience, do you see staff put what they have taught into practice? Now here we're talking about a continuum, so I didn't add that to the poll, which I should have done, and next time I ask it I shall do that. But Richard, let's just go to you quickly while those answers come up, because what are some of the reasons that people don't implement what they have learned?
The main reason is going to be the culture within the organisation. That's the main reason in practice. So, having wearing my inspection hat, I've seen many businesses that are not really ensuring that what the people have got has been actually implemented. So in a lot of cases it's not. And that's usually, not always, but sometimes it's down to the fact that we don't train the managers. So we're training all the food handlers, and everybody makes that mistake, and every country just about goes and trains all the food handlers and doesn't require the managers to be trained in the legislation, in practice. And it's certainly the case in the UK. So that's one of the reasons. As I've said, within the organisation, if many companies, not all companies, only train because it's a legal requirement. And we often get to say, look, we've got this fantastic training course for you that will benefit you on allergens or something, and somebody will turn around and say, is it a legal requirement? No? Oh well, I'm not going to do it. I'm not saying that's everybody, but a lot of people are not interested unless it's a legal requirement. And then the problem becomes, is that being enforced? And how is it being enforced? Because if, as we've said, the implementation is the most important thing, then the implementation is only tested by observation. And what's happening is many auditors and inspectors are going round, particularly in the UK, and saying, are your staff trained? Yes. Here's a certificate. Okay, that's one tick off. Because we were saying this morning, the problem is the auditors don't have sufficient time. And so they don't have time to stand and watch and observe and see what things are happening. So that's another problem. But there are lots of different problems why training is not implemented effectively within the workplace, and that's from inspecting thousands and thousands of businesses.
Okay, and so Richard just said that one of the top thing you mentioned, and I don't know if it is your top issue, but is cultural in an organisation.
Generally speaking, yes. If the organisation is only interested in complying with the legislation, then they'll do the minimum amount. Whereas what you want is somebody that is really interested in improving food safety and believes in the importance of the training, as was said, that when people see it as a requirement, not something to enjoy or something that's what you want.
But surely it needs to be a requirement as well.
It needs, yes, because that's the first stage. Most people won't do it if it's not a requirement.
Okay, so who agrees? Who agrees with Richard then that training doesn't necessarily take off? So I can't see everybody, so I'm sitting and perched myself up here. Do you agree with Richard that it really has to be made part of the culture of company or food company to get training off the ground? Is that one of the essential elements, would you say, Barbara?
Absolutely. I think it was said well. Joe said it well, that training is just part of it. It's culture, it's organization. Dean made a great point, how do we look at the situation? So I agree with Richard 100%. It has to be more than just a box you tick.
Okay, so Joe, I'd just like to come to you then, because you've collected and analysed a lot of data on low scoring features of training areas. So what else have you been seeing?
So we've assessed tens of thousands of organisations in the context of their organisational culture, most of them food organisations, and training is one of the components that we assess, one of the 20. And we look at a few different measures. We look at the frequency people are training to find out how often it's happening. We look at whether it has a practical impact. We look at whether it's providing new knowledge. We look at whether it's enjoyable. So we look at different dimensions of training, and we sit that within the context of people being empowered, rewarded, the facilities, the management, all of the rest of it. And one of my colleagues is in the room actually, and she always finds it really fascinating that the enjoyment always comes at the bottom. Because to us, training all of us, I think, I can speak for us, it's so fun, it's so great, and you do that training session where everyone's engaged and passionate, and you think, how could it be the least enjoyable? How could that be the part that's like the hardest to achieve? So I think that probably does come back to the fact that for some people it's an obligation, something that they just have to do. So I think that when we look at frequency, it's very varied. Managers are normally at the bottom. Again, as Richard said, that's supported by the data. Enjoyment is low, and practical impact is usually lower as well. So the new information is normally a little bit higher up the scale, and then the practical impact of the enjoyment is usually a little bit further down. So yeah, lots to learn about how people are feeling and evaluating their own training and their own organisations then.
So how, and this, I guess we'll look at this later, but so making training enjoyable, extrapolating from what you've said, has to be a priority in any training program?
I think that's what brings the passion. Training, if you're in a university, fine, it's often about imparting knowledge. Great, you don't need to enjoy yourself to impart knowledge. If you want to change someone's mind, if you want to get them to change their behaviour, there's got to be a bit more to it. There's got to be a bit more of a magical moment, a light bulb, something that's just bigger and deeper has to happen. And so, quite a lot of people know me because I live here in Dubai, and they know I come from a very crazy family where both my parents are food safety trainers from 50 years back. And I remember being a young teenager and my mum coming in the door and getting angry phone calls from business managers saying, my cleaning bill's gone up, my paper towel bill's gone up, will you stop telling all these food workers to basically form mini unions and start demanding more this, more that, and just the excitement that would generate, that you're actually getting to people's hearts and minds and affecting change in an organisation. So for me, that passion, that's always been like a key component of a training that you want to have a real world impact.
And so let's just raise your hands for people who are trainers and people who have received training. How important do you think enjoyment is in terms of that training? And I think enjoyment, engagement, sparking a passion. Raise your hands. Okay, so I think we've got general agreement on that point, which brings me to Layal, because Layal, in terms of traditional training, and I think maybe we're putting traditional training methods to one side more and more today. What would you say is the problem? Why are learners not engaged?
We have a lot of limitation with the traditional way we do teaching. I will focus for the sake of time on the three important ones. I will address them through three thinking questions I will address to the audience. So the first one, what do you remember from what you learned at school or at university? Please raise your hand if you feel very confident about what you learned.
Oops.
That's good. So this is the first challenge, retention of the information. We are receiving a lot of information. Maybe they are useful, maybe they are not, but we are not retaining. Second question, how useful were those information for you? Did you raise your hand if you find there is a gap between the theory and the practice? Okay, so this is the second challenge, a gap between theory and the practice. Third question, how engaged and motivated were you? And this is what you just asked, and you already answered this question. There are many limitations, but those are three important ones.
Thank you. And thank you very much for participating. And so then I guess, Amy, my question for you is, what are we doing then? How are we trying to connect with our learners now, and how would that inform what we should be doing in some respects?
Richard raises the point of when is it a regulatory requirement? In many countries, training is not required to enter the food sector. If you are going to be a food handler in a food service operation or in a food manufacturing, if you are an entry-level worker, in many cases training is not required, and therefore it then is incumbent on the culture of the organization to either enforce it and to reinforce it, or to identify the outliers who are self-selected and motivated. And because I work a lot with open education resources, these are within the non-formal sector of training, where they're just resources that are put out there for the common good, for democratic access, because we see that the food sector is essential for our humanity. And it's really fascinating for me because while I've had tens of thousands of hits on my content, it's uncommon to get any feedback because it's a static piece, static's perhaps the wrong term. There's a lot of interactive modalities, H5P, video content, etc. And it's rare when you get those letters or those email messages from people who say, I did this module and it changed my life. I got a letter from a young person in Bangladesh who said, I did your whole module on nutrition labeling. I now provide a service to the company that I have been working at as a general worker, and now I'm advanced and have become their labeling specialist. Another person who was a night worker, working as a cleaner in a factory in Texas, wrote to me and said, I've been doing the sanitation shift for the longest time. I watched your modules on food safety management and GMP, and now I'm a supervisor on the day shift, and this is a transformative thing. Where does that motivation come from? Is it an external negative motivator, like the regulatory systems, or is it an internalized motivator? That, finding those people who have that internal motivation to just go and learn is rare, but when we find them, it's magical. How do we create cultures where people actually care about the food system?
It's amazing. This is turning into quite a deep conversation, and I quite like it. So, in a very brief, and I'm sorry if it's too brief, but so we're saying culture is important.
Yes.
Training has to be enjoyable and engaging and make you feel passionate about what you're doing. You don't want it to make it a requirement. You know, it doesn't have to be like ticking the box, I've done this training, and people then don't really want to do it. And I guess it has to be meaningful, and it has to, you as a trainer, you want to have feedback, to be told what is going right, and I guess also what's going wrong. But now I'm going to hand over to Barbara, who's going to do the difficult bit, because I'd like you to kind of draw all these pieces together, and in some respects transition from the problems in a training process, and how we can become critical of that process and start changing things and turning things around.
Well, the first step is to become very brave, because it's very hard. It takes a lot of bravery to look at what we're doing and say, what we're doing may not be good enough. What I'm doing may not be good enough. When I see somebody who's doing something similar to what I do, and it's better than what I do, my first response is not always, good for them. My first response is always a little bit of disappointment that I wasn't better. So we have to get over that hump, and we have to feel ready to make what we're going to do better. So it's very brave for all of us to be here, I think, and be open to that. So I think hearing criticism, you can probably tell I trend a bit towards being an optimist. And so when I hear criticism, it's not always something that I am able to easily take in and improve. But that kind of criticism is critical for us to understand what we're doing. So for me, what it all comes down to is design. Design, design, design. How do we design with all of these things? The areas that we're each talking about that were really important to us, it's critical to design. Are we trying to get them to learn how to wash their hands? Or are we trying to get them to understand the critical points that they need to wash their hands? Or are we trying to get them to understand what's going to make washing their hands difficult when they get into the job? So I think looking at those sort of things are important. And then for me, I would also say the trend I have heard multiple times over this conference is the idea of empowerment. That we want our learners to learn how to do a thing. We want them to learn the processes for doing the thing. But one of the better measures of a training program is, can they do it? Do they know what they're doing? Can they do it at the right time? And do they feel like they are special? That they are the ones, they have the power to make the difference. And if we can imbue them with that empowerment, if we can help them understand that it's all up to you, you have the power, I think to me that's what would be most exciting about the program.
Okay, well this is where I think Joanne and Amy come in, and I'd like you to comment on that. So as a psychologist, how do you create that empowerment? How do you empower the trainers who then impart that empowerment on the people who are learning with them?
So within a training course, the trainer can utilise psychological theory can you do within the confines that you have before thinking of the broader context? So when you know what you need to get across and you know why you need to get it across, what's the best way? And I think a good takeaway for any trainer is to make it as real as possible. You know, we have outbreaks happening sadly every day. We have outbreaks with incredibly significant, serious consequences, loss of life happening around the world because of foodborne disease. So taking the closest examples that you can and bringing them in, it not only increases risk awareness, when people start to actually think, oh God, like this isn't just about something really boring, this is about something really serious, but also starts to build in the simple practical things that could have averted that. So that people start to learn risk and they also start to learn controls. So utilising that idea of heightening people's sense of risk, I think is something that people can adopt in a training environment. In an organisation, of course, it gets bigger and more complex because you have to think about then how to empower and recognise people when they exhibit the attitudes and behaviours that you have trained them in, that you wanted to train them in. So if somebody does something, this is a big question I get into quite a lot with organisations. Should I recognise someone for just doing their job? That's their job. What? Why are you saying I need to recognise them for doing their job? But the fact is, as we know from psychological theory, without the recognition step, they might have done the job that time, but you're not sending a positive message to that person or all the people around them that that's actually the behaviour you're looking for. You're not giving them that elevated status for having performed the behaviour. So in the organisation, that empowerment recognition piece is really, really important for the individuals. So I think the psychology runs all through it, but there I say the two big takeaways I would say from in the training and in the organisation.
And it's really interesting because that recognition aspect, for anybody who has kids here, they'd be doing the same thing with your kids. They do something well and you're like, hey, that was really good. You must have said the same well.
If anyone's got a husband, this is what I
That
always
doesn't
say when
work
I'm
though.
training. Like, you want them to do the dishwasher again? You're going to say nothing? Really? We all know differently.
So now the interesting thing is I think because Amy's training is very different, but a lot of the training you do in Canada, you're telling me, is online. So how does that translate online? How do you empower the trainer? There's far fewer of them, if I remember rightly, and they teach far more people proportionately. So how does that dynamic work?
So, for example, one of the programs that I've been involved in is called Skills Training Across Canada. And if you can imagine, Canada is the second largest country in the whole world, and our population is actually quite small and very dispersed, other than a few urban centers. And so, how do we deal with this training? We have to be really, really deliberate about what are the skills that are convergent and are delivered consistently time and time again. And we can make that into online training that has a lot of different interactive elements, H5P, video, formative assessment, cumulative assessment, that allows the participant to repeat that learning until they feel that they have a strong level of mastery of that skill. We spent a lot of time when designing, I have my prop here, it's our learning recognition framework where we interviewed hundreds of workers across the country in their current state, plus foresighting, to say what are those skills. This, if you haven't met our friends at Food Processing Skills, they have some of these posters. It's also interactive. Each box has hundreds of different occupational competencies, all walk through an occupational task assessment. So how do we do this? Each of those learning outcomes then becomes learning content in modules that is repositioned in multiple ways. We ask questions about rigor and relevance. Is this a skill that you just kind of need to know and have a low-level learning taxonomy, or is this a skill that's critical that you need to have repeated and seen from a wide variety of different scenarios to be able to have a mastery skill set at a much higher Bloom's taxonomy, those of you not even really got that magic word in there. But we have to think very discreetly about what is convergent learning. So what are these skills that are consistently done the same way? And then when it comes to now interpreting it in the real world, we have to work with supervisors, we have to work with managers, and we have a secondary skills training across Canada program that's specifically targeted to them, which talks about how do you go about now assessing competency in the workplace? How do you go about doing the continuing coaching and mentoring necessary for the success of those workers. And that is, it's also online learning, but with more of the one-on-one mentoring and coaching from some of our expert trainers at food processing skills.
Okay, so that's a very effective way, as you were saying, of democratizing learning as well, because you can actually access a lot of people. Now, you emphasized a lot the issue of interactive learning, and this is where I bring in Layal, because you are kind of our technology expert on our panel. And in terms of gaming and issues like that, what are your kind of solutions that you are putting into play?
Yes, in order to answer this, we should first clarify the difference between active learning and passive learning.
Yes.
And passive learning is a traditional way where we have the audience sitting and listening, and we have the presenter talking. And the best that we can do in this scenario is that the audience will listen to us for 10, if you are amazing, 15 minutes, and then they will be switched off and thinking about something else. However, active learning is the process of engaging the audience in the learning process. Ideally, we want to use all their senses. They want to hear, to listen, to touch, to do. And that's why gaming can be considered an example of active learning. Why is that? We are in the game, we are playing, we are completing the module, we are doing the interactive game, the quizzes in order to pass to the next step. We are applying the information immediately in a simulated real-world scenario. We have a story component. All the game is built as stories and interactive game, and we know that stories help us to retain information. We have the funny character in the game. We relate to them, they are funny, we retain the information. We have the reward and achievement. We complete something, we collect points, we collect badges, we have a sense of achievement and engagement. And all this address the challenges that we address in the first question.
And so does that happen alongside traditional teaching, as you were saying, or would you say that this kind of more gaming teaching and training can happen on its own?
It can be done both ways. It can be done in its own way. So this is one possible option. But also I think that the ideal approach would be to have some blended training, where we still have some interaction with the trainer, formative assessment to make sure that the trainee got all what they needed. But yes, now there is an example done with the mentor team, and it's completely independent and web-based.
Interesting. Okay, so this is where I'm going to bring in our voice of experience, and that is Richard. Because what I would like to know is, okay, so what I've heard during this conference about hybrid learning, which is kind of what we're mentioning, just having a bit of internet, online training, and training in person, hands-on, just online, just hands-on. Where do you position yourself to the most effective training that you have witnessed and seen?
That's $100 billion question. The overall, at the moment, I'd say the most effective training that I've witnessed is from an experienced motivational trainer who knows his subject and knows the learners very well. The problem is we're finding that you've got good and bad examples, and you've got cheap and expensive examples of e-learning. And there's a lot on the market that is very bad. And I would ask the question, well, if it's cheap and so on, and sometimes you can have it free that is very good. I'm not saying that. I mean, our own government provides very good, free e-learning training, but a lot of it, I look at the content and think, who on earth is giving all this misinformation? And that's all over the internet, and that worries me, that because people are in pursuit of the lowest prices now, that we're getting poor training. So it's not just a matter of, is e-learning can be very good for certain things, in my view, certainly for refreshing knowledge on a regular basis is great, because you go on a course and then it might be some time before you ever do it again. You need to keep that information up to date. E-learning on your mobile phone can be great for that. It could be great for people who fail exams and they need to pass an exam to get their job, and they keep failing, and you can't keep sitting on the course indefinitely, so they can do e-learning. And some e-learning is very, very good. But I haven't seen e-learning as motivational as a really good trainer. That's you asking which is the best. But then again, unfortunately, we've got problems with trainers as well. And so we've got trainers who are giving out poor content. We've got trainers who are very knowledgeable but very boring. We've got so many variations, so you can't say one is the best or the other. There are very good examples of both, is where I'd say.
And this is a very practical question, but I was just wondering, because you were talking there's a lot of e-learning available, is there some sort of certification process? So when someone is looking for the best course, they know what to go for? Is there a website that groups all that people here could go to? Amy?
So with Food Processing Skills Canada, we just developed a ISO 17011 standard for accreditation of food systems training. And so we're just starting to implement that, and I know my friends have been talking to a lot of different individuals about that accreditation process. And it's very meticulous, it's very rigorous because it does meet the ISO 17011 requirements. And the big challenge being for small training operations to go through that process, the rigor required is quite exhaustive. So this is going to be one of our barriers. We found this in Canada when we were doing the pilot program, that a number of different organizations, including universities, going through that process, said, this is taking a long time. We went with ISO because we knew that the rigor was going to be meeting all international standards. And we're asking the question, what would be a happy medium between that? Because inevitably, training needs to be accessible and democratically available, and it needs to meet rigor and relevant standards. However, if making accreditation is impossible because it's just too onerous, then because it's still voluntary, how are we going to be pushing that as an important part?
Yeah, that's an important question. Well, look, I'm going to if we could possibly draw up the next couple of polls. The first one is, what is missing in training? And while that's coming up, I just wanted to quickly have a quick answer from each of you, where you stand on what Richard was saying. Richard was saying the best motivational learner will always, if it's a good learner, trainer, be better than an online course. Are people, when we're talking about technology, worry about technology taking over? When it comes to learning, if you have the choice, is a person better than a computer?
That's such a hard question to answer, because the answer is, what do you think? And it's your goal. I prefer hands-on. I'm a technology person. I make gains. Hands-on learning is always best. But the best learning is the learning that your learner can have access to. And if that's at their own time because they're going to do it, because it's efficient, because they have maybe some kind of accessibility needs, or they're on the spectrum and in-person training is overwhelming. So that's why it takes 3,000 of us at this conference, right? Is you have to pick what's best for your learners. So it depends.
So it has to be customizable in some respects.
It's just for whatever audience.
Okay.
That's our job, is to figure that out for each of our individuals.
Nobody's going to give me a...
No, it's too hard.
It's the right method for the
For the
group.
right-
I mean, 20 plus years ago, I worked on an online MSc program teaching hazard. It was the only program in existence, so we had students from 40 countries who couldn't possibly have afforded to fly to the UK for us to teach them. It was at the time when I would say, touch your mouse, and some of them would go like that. You know, it was so long ago we didn't even have the technology that we have now. People didn't really understand how to use it, but it was all we had, and we made the best of it, and we did a good job at the time. Now it's come on so far. But the other thing, it's not just about what's available, it's about the learner. I used to think of myself as a young person, and I would think that I knew what the fresh ideas were, and I knew what the next thing was, and I had all these ideas, and I have to accept now I don't. There are people 20 years younger in the field bringing in new technologies and new ideas that suit younger learners now that wouldn't suit people my age. So I think also there are learners that for different reasons might actually benefit more
Layal. So what do young people want then in terms of this question I was asking? Are they wanting more online, more gamification, or do they prefer the old-fashioned person, you know, most motivational person in the room more?
Let's think what gaming, how it can empower them as learners, and maybe we can invest it and we get feedback to decide and answer better this question. I think that in addition to what I just previously said about the advantage of gaming, it can empower them because it puts them in a simulated real-world environment. They are practicing in a safe environment, and it will give them more confidence. We cannot do this in a traditional training. Another aspect that gaming can provide them is it can make hard scientific concepts much easier. Imagine in safety we are talking about those microorganisms that we cannot see with the naked eyes. Cross-contamination with gaming, we are able to do visualization, to see those microorganisms, to see how they can be transferred from one surface to another. Another advantage how gaming can empower those learners is that the language barriers. We know in the food industry, the food handlers are coming from different nationalities, especially in UAE and in GCC countries. So imagine if the best approach is to give the trainer the training in the native language, because most of them, they don't speak English very well. The advantage of gaming and AR is that they can translate the training. So again, this will empower the training and maybe help us to improve what we are doing. Again, and also as you mentioned, we can do real-time feedback immediately. You learn, you apply, you get feedback, you correct it, and then move on. We can have personalized feedback. Those things that we cannot do in a traditional way. How can we do that? So after you complete the training, you do an assessment. And using data analysis and AI, we can assess the gap for the specific trainer. Where did they miss out? We assess the gap, we give them recommendation. You have a gap in this module, they go and repeat it, other than repeating all the course. So there are some advantages that are worth to be explored. So let's try it. It's time to think outside the box, to try something new.
And I'm thinking back to what Barbara said, Amy, it's about design ultimately. If it's something that's well designed in person, well designed online, gamification, and you need to be able to take the time and, dare I say, customize, as you were saying, Layal, for well, maybe culture, depending where the training is taking place, and language and other issues that would come into that.
I resonate with what Layal was saying about using AI and rapid translation tools to be able to increase accessibility of content. Now, I'm lucky in that I do both formal education as well as non-formal training, and have the experience of working with so many different global audiences. Now, I find that the online learning works extremely well when it's very convergent content, where you know that this is the procedure that you follow, this is the equation that you perform, this is the process flow that you have to accomplish. And with there, then you're able to program for those rapid feedback cycles, those cumulative assessments and formative assessments that are going through that process to make sure that people know what they're doing. Now, I also teach a lot in food innovation systems, and there it's really divergent because we're trying to increase the problem solving, creative thinking, and stimulus, and doing formative assessment on that is really, really complicated because there's not one answer. And there's not one pathway to do things. And there, going back to the engage through hybrid or engage through in-person makes far more sense, because we can introduce the concepts, but we can't take it to a mastery level without actually workshopping and hearing this ridiculous diversity of answers that people are going to come up with.
And okay, so I was just looking at our poll, and it's quite interesting because I think it very much reflects what you have all been saying. You know, it's too small to read on the panels, but basically 39, so nearly half of them, 40% of people said that what was missing in training is more hands-on, real-world scenarios. So that is where gamification can step in, but then it is also exactly as you were saying, Joe, that's what's required, I think, and also Richard, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, and I'm a fan of e-learning, as I've said as well. but you can't bespoke it to the small and medium-sized businesses because it's too expensive for that. You may be able to do it for a large organisation, so you can do generic food safety, that's fine. You also, although that there are moves afoot to look at types of questions, every course that I can think I've been on, people have got specific questions that they want, which is just bespoke for them. And again, that's what you can get from a personal, knowledgeable trainer. As I've said, it's got to be a good trainer who knows knowledge. And in terms of experience, again, an experienced motivational trainer who actually has worked in the industry and been in the industry can give their own life stories of many things that have happened to actually illustrate a point asked, which gamification at the moment couldn't possibly cover everything because they don't know what it's going to be. So, yeah, as I said, they both have advantages and disadvantages, but I would still say that overall, at the present time, especially for medium and small businesses, that if you can get an experienced trainer that is motivational, then that's going to give you the best results. I wait for when gamification and e-learning can actually answer questions as well that are bespoke to the individual and the organisation.
Okay, so we're going to hand this over to you in a few minutes to take some questions. But before we do that, I basically want to find out from you some tips that you can share with everybody about how you empower a trainer, how you empower a learner. Because I heard the word empowerment, and that's what apparently it's all about. So what are your tips that you can share with people here? Barbara.
I wanted to add to something Layal said. You did such a great job of talking about the affordances of games and what games can do. And there's two additional things that they can do, there's many additional things they can do, but two I want to mention. One is the idea of safe failure, and the other is unlimited patience. A game or something like that will let you fail as many times as you need. You're not actually going to kill anybody in the game if you get it wrong. And it's unlimitedly patient to let you do it and try it again. So at the end, you feel not only that you have mastered this content, but you feel good about yourself for seeing your progress and feeling confident. So for me, I would say it's feedback to let people see their progress, and then it's the emotional stories or some kind of an emotional content to help them realize that they have the power to do this well.
Yeah, I agree, because when I've done a lot of learning, I don't know about you, but if I've been in, for example, a lecture situation, it sometimes has gone over my head. And the beauty of doing something online is you can actually press pause and rewind if necessary.
And
Speaking in old
judges you.
language. But,
Nobody knows that you had to watch it twice. You get to just see it twice, and you're okay. No judgment.
and that is empowering. What about you, Jo?
So I mentioned earlier about real examples, and I think that's the big one. But the other thing I would say is active demonstration. So food safety is a very practical subject. It's a very real life subject. And so I don't think I've ever been in a training situation where I couldn't find something that could involve demonstration. And because the best way of learning is by teaching, sharing the teacher role. So if you give your students the opportunity to teach something back through demonstration as an example, you tick so many boxes, it doesn't cost anything. I've done courses with people where they have to use anything in the room to do a food safety demonstration. It's funny, it's silly, but if you do it properly, you get them teaching content back to you in a fun way with real things that they can touch and feel. So, there's little examples, it doesn't cost anything, and with a bit of practice,
Can you give us an
into the
example?
training. So you could do an example on if there was something you're worried about, a particular activity, cleaning, let's say cleaning, you could ask your students to teach a high-risk learner's cleaning scenario for you, but they have to make the props. So you give everybody 20 minutes, they make some props, and they have to come in and they say, this is a high-risk situation, here's how we would clean, and they explain why. This is a low-risk situation, this is how we would clean. Very simple, but a year from then, if you ask them about the differences and they'll probably remember, because they remember teaching it as well as doing it. So I think often, even if we're limited on time and budget, we can bring in lots of different ideas to make training a bit more memorable and a bit more engaging and empowering, because they're also the confidence of them doing it and being told, yes, you did a good job as the teacher.
Yeah, and I suppose imprint itself in your brain in a different way. What about you, Layal?
I would say that it's time to think outside the box. We cannot keep doing the same thing day after day and expect different results. This is the definition of insanity. We need innovation. Technology can be helpful. However, technology can be helpful only if we use it in the right way. What is the right way to use technology? The right way is to make it combined with science. I can share with you how we did it. When we did the gaming, we didn't start by the technology at all. We started by the food code. We started by the scientific reference. This is how we started. And then we started imagining how this hard concept can be transformed into stories, into games. We wrote around 600 in IDD design, instructional design material. Then we transformed it into game. And then we translate the game, we reviewed the game to see what we missed in the translation. And only when we do a systematic and meticulous approach, technology can help us to impact learner and to change the future of training.
Amy?
I think my biggest empowerment message is name the skill. And that's empowering both for the student who are the participants in the training to be able to say, at the end of this training, using CBET or competency-based education and training theory, at the end of this module, at the end of this, I will be able to do this. And using that active verb and being really deliberate, I will be able to perform this skill. I will be able to do this. I will be able to examine or investigate or analyze this. And being so deliberate about naming it, I think is part of empowerment. Likewise, when we're working with training of trainers, when they see all these frameworks and they go, oh, I need to be able to teach and demonstrate all of these different skills. When they've got organized frameworks like what we've been working on, suddenly they're able to go in as trainers and say, I know how to do that. I feel really good about that. But likewise, walking outside of the ego and saying, wait a second, I don't know how to deliver against this. Many times our trainers are in that cognitive bias to say, yeah, I'm a trainer, I know how to do everything. Nobody knows how to do everything. I've been doing this for 20 years and I don't know how to do everything. But when I start to build these validated tools with all of these named skills in these organizational tasks assessments, I'm able to step outside of my ego and my pride as a researcher in this area and say, I actually don't know how to do that. So how can I upgrade my skill as a trainer so that I'm authentically delivering against that and feel really good about the delivery that I'm doing? And so this tool, I think, has been one of my favorite things that has transformed how we do training around the world.
Amazing. Okay, well, let's get our next poll up. And our next poll was, what is food training really good at? Now let's see, I don't think there's going to be much concordance of what we've been saying. It'd be great if I could multitask and rewrite the polls as we're discussing, but I haven't gone to that yet. But we had issues of awareness, procedures, accountability, prevention, and possible crisis management situations. And here we found awareness and prevention as the top answers. And well, there's not much surprise in that, is there? That's really what we'd be thinking. Okay, so we'll pause it there, unless we have something particular. Oh, go on, Amy.
Well, for me as an andragogical design specialist, but a food scientist first, I see the word awareness, and when we think about teaching and learning, first off we have that knowledge and awareness, that foundation. If you think of it as a big triangle, this is what we call Bloom's taxonomy. Awareness is the baseline for competency, but it doesn't mean that people can apply it. It doesn't mean they can use it in a meaningful way to do problem solving or analysis or use it in complex, unknown ways. And so I'm not surprised that awareness is there because it's the foundation of virtually all training tools that are out there. Really good training pushes people into the space of, I can apply and do this skill. And in some cases, we actually have to be deliberate about the task or the element of performance that trainee needs to do, and push them into a level of mastery where they can actually use it in complex and unknown ways on a routine basis. Awareness doesn't do that necessarily.
I agree. You have to almost go Layal.
I think any training, and ideal training, should address two main components, the why and the how. Sometimes we tend directly to tell the employee how to do it. You measure the temperature this way, you do it this way. But if they don't know the why, it's very hard. Why is that? Because all the tasks that we do in food safety are repetitive and annoying. We need to take the temperature every 5 minutes, every half an hour, every 2 hours. From a food handler, why? Are you punishing me? So why the temperature should be 75, not 74? However, when they know that those tasks can save the life of another person, they would be more willing to apply this knowledge. Then they are ready to know and to learn how to take the minimum internal temperature, how to record the sheet, why it's important to stay outside the danger zone, and so on.
Such useful information. Thank you very much. So, do we have any questions in the room? If we do have any questions, do raise your hand. We don't have any on the app just yet, so we do have a question just there in the middle of the room. We should have a microphone somewhere. But I think we'll be coming down to you. While we're waiting for the microphone, I'm going to go back into this little hornet's nest we had over lunch. It wasn't a hornet's nest, but qualification over qualities. Would you say it is important, more important, to have qualifications to become a successful food safety manager or inspector, or is it better as a trainer to look for the qualities in that person? Richard?
Yeah, I don't think the word was quality, it was skill.
Skill,
And
okay.
we're looking at qualification versus skill. If we say qualification versus competency, then what I would want as a business is competency, undoubtedly. But it's difficult to sell competency when you're looking for a job, and therefore for the individual, probably a qualification is better at least of getting you shortlisted for a job. So that's the thing. The company needs competency, the individual needs a qualification for career progression.
So yes, I suppose in a real world example, qualifications still are the best way to find the right person if you're looking for somebody who's received the right training.
To shortlist people, normally you'd be looking at qualification because you haven't got time to assess people's competency. Before you appoint somebody, then you're looking for competency. So that's what any job, when we're applying, when we're advertising jobs of any type of food safety, the first one we're looking at experience and how well the CV is written and so on, and what qualifications they've got. That gets them to the actual shortlisted, but then you're looking for competency. So competency at the end of the day is what should be assessed to determine whether somebody's successful.
Do you agree?
So, I wrote an article in Food in Canada magazine about this specific topic, in that I agree 100% that competency is, if you read many of the different GFSI codes, they're asking for competency. However, employers use that qualification, but we have to, as employers or managers who are hiring, also go through and reflect the practice and say what are the appropriate qualifications that are necessary. So, is it a certificate from, I don't know, I saw NSF was here, or Highfields? Is that the appropriate qualification? Could it be a diploma or a degree from a higher education institute? What we have found in Canada in particular is that there's a bias towards a very narrow range of training organizations. And meanwhile, there are a lot of excellent training organizations that are providing either formalized or non-formal education or training that fulfills the competency requirement, but the hiring groups are saying, well, we will only accept a certificate, an 8-hour training from NSF or something like that as the requirement for this job. Meanwhile, this person maybe has hundreds of hours from an higher education institution in the same skill set. And the employers are saying, no, that doesn't happen. You have to take 8 hours at NSF.
But then I suppose that, well, without going to get back into this discussion, I suppose that helps Richard, in some respects, sort through a pile of CVs that you receive in your inbox. But let's receive this question. Well, just before we get our question, I want you to think of your conclusion. And your conclusion is going to be to impart and share, as I was saying, a tip, but one tip, to make training practices better. That it's not going to cost the earth, either. Something people can do, and just one thing. Because we'll probably have a variety, and I apologise to the person who's at the end of the line, because they may have said it already. But let's grab the question, sorry. Do we have the microphone here? Thank you. Would you be able to tell us who you are and where you're from?
Yeah. Hi, this is Dr. Veena, I'm from India. So, my observation in our training, let me give you input like that. We do trainings in food safety in QHSC. We would have completed more than 30,000 trainings the last year. But one thing which I understood, or from the feedback, what we understood that majority of the trainings are like people are feeling it good to know, but not need to know of the art. So this is one, objective. Like we started revisiting our training programs and things like that. If there is any good suggestion or a way forward, it will be great stuff. Thank you.
So that was more of a comment than a question. So from what you're saying, do you agree that in some respects, and I think it's what you probably were saying actually, that it's Layal, you've got to know the why and the how. Why are you doing it? How are you doing it? Good to know, need to know. And so then again, we have some convergence on our panel. Do you agree? I can't see.
Yeah, the problem is we've changed a lot of our qualifications because people were putting in things that weren't relevant to the job. I'll give you a typical example. Some qualifications have a lot of microbiology in the food safety qualifications. At level 2 and level 3, we've taken those out. We were finding that people knew every characteristic of salmonella, which is almost irrelevant to a food handler, but couldn't know how to cool food safely. Just an example. So yes, I'm with you if you're saying we're looking at what they need to know to do the job. And that's what you need to focus on and keep repeating. What is necessary to produce safe food, because that's the objective.
Beautifully put. Do we have any more questions in the room? I believe not. So in that case, let's close off. Oh, we do? I'm a little short-sighted, so I do apologise.
Hi. Brent Baker, National Environmental Health Association.
Hi.
No matter how much fun the training is, the bottom line is it remembered. Are any of you working on the concept of long-term knowledge retention studies to be able to determine whether these trainings you're actually creating are having a long-term knowledge retention ability with the people that are taking the training? Thank you.
Is anybody?
Well, I was just thinking that the only thing I know about that is the forgetting curve, which says that whatever, on average, the majority of people within a week forget 90% of what they've been taught. That is research that's on the internet that people can look at. And therefore, how you combat that is important. And to my way of thinking, that's why training on the job is even more essential than training in the classroom or outside. Because it's got to be repeated, it's got to be reinforced, and you've got to recognise people that are applying good food safety standards. That recognition becomes part of the empowerment, and that's what we've got to concentrate on. It's also what's going to be one of my tips for taking away, that we need to concentrate on businesses ensuring that what they've been taught, people implement, and I think everybody's been saying that all the time.
Okay, well look, let's close off our panel. Oh, no, go now, sorry. I was just too hasty.
I would say now what we expect, how we expect gaming would help to improve the retaining of information. First, we are doing the thing because we are applying the information immediately, We are using story to retain information. We are using the character, the engagement. We are using the active learning, the feedback, the quizzes. So far, I cannot give data numbers because we just launched the program. But from the preliminary assessment, we have like 20% improved on the retention and in the learning outcome, but hopefully in the next conference, we will have more data and evidence to see how those trainings are able to improve the retention and the learning outcomes.
You have to tell us next year to see how that information has been retained. So I believe we have one more question that we can take, and then we will have to close. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that good question, Lance.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Russell. I'm from Dubai Airports. It's just like something about related to the question on retention, on knowledge retention. Because nowadays, as we all know, as we have mentioned earlier, that the lessons that we have learned way back in school might not be easily recalled at the moment. Would you recommend, or do you believe in the aspect or on the concept of providing quick write guides and quick reference guides in each of the food service industries? Especially so because training doesn't end in one particular venue. It should always be continuous anywhere else where they should go. So do you recommend the probability of having those quick write guides and quick reference guides?
Very practical question. Thank you very much. Yes.
I'm a firm believer in Poke-Yoke, which is one of those Japanese manufacturing concepts to make the system impossible to fail. Poke-Yoke quite literally means idiot-proof. But I always say everyone who comes to work is a good person and has sincere desire to be there. So I do not like the term, but that's quite literally what it is. Visual operating procedures, having quick guides that are laminated and on the wall. These are wonderful ways to make sure that the system is mistake-proof. And that becomes that quick point that a supervisor, a manager can walk in and quickly point and say, this is what we need to do. Making sure that those tools that are also accessible within the language and the visual requirements so that people can interpret them within their learning space. So if it needs to be in multiple languages, do it. If it needs to be a visual, make it into photographs. Don't make it all in words. Make it into images. That way, we are working across that entire systematic approach to make sure that mistakes do not happen and that we can quickly retrain with 20, 30 seconds of point. That's what you need to do. Remember, let's keep on referring to it.
So they work.
They do.
Fantastic. Okay, so I am now going to close our panel. And I will ask you all, if you could, just to impart then some actionable change, one actionable change that any trainer here could put into practice in the short term. I'm not saying it can happen immediately, to change the way their training is carried out, implemented, retained, how to empower the people they're teaching, all the things we've been discussing. Barbara, you're nodding at me, so I'm going to start with you.
Don't design for delivery, design for change. Don't design for delivery, design for change. In all ways, think of your user, how are they going to be different after your training than they are now, and design for that change. They are receptacles to be filled, they are whole people, bringing their whole selves to the interaction, design for their change.
Beautifully put, and lovely and succinct. Jo.
So I've done a few practical things for trainers so far, so I'll say something a little bit different now, which is about the organisation, and that's know your culture. And I think the last two comments and questions feed into that. Training is here, we have systems, we have organisational values, we have communication, we have reward systems, we have so many different component parts of an organisation. So know your culture, know where training fits into it, and understand how what happens day to day can block or support what's happened in the training. Final thing in that, talk to the trainees, because there's a lot of information they have that can help you, and that doesn't require a big study. Amazing big studies are happening, but you can also just talk to your trainees as well. That'll give you a lot of insight into what's working and what's it's not. Sorry, that was both of things. But
No, it was very clear, which is what I love. Richard.
I think making training practical and relevant to the organisation, that's very important. I think we've got to train managers, emphasis train managers, and finally we've got to have effective food safety training requirements in legislation and enforcement of that to get a level playing field.
Again, you're such a clever, fantastic panel. Amy.
Name the skill. And that drives back to competency-based education and training theory, in that when you're naming and listing out those skills and turning it into active verbs, then the trainee knows exactly what they can do at the end, and you as the trainer know exactly what you need to deliver, what you know, what you need to learn so that you can authentically deliver it.
Fantastic. Layal.
Again, think outside the box, think innovation, combine technology with science. Our goal in food safety should go beyond certification. Our goal is to save the life of people. And only when we set the bar very high, the worst that we can do, hopefully, is to meet the certification requirements.
Thank you very much. I don't need to conclude this panel. You've concluded it so beautifully, even though I was just taking notes. A big, big hand of applause, please, for Ruby, Barbara, Layal, and Amy. Thank you very much.